In the middle of a little town of Empire, you'll find a museum run by a man by the name of Dave Taghon. Dave runs a museum that's anything but ordinary, and the man is a first-class storyteller.
A friend of mine and myself found two brothers dead in their house, the Rowan brothers. A third brother had disappeared years before, and we ended up going to their auction after having found $100,000 in cash in their house, which we didn't get to keep. But we did find all this beautiful bar and related equipment we're standing in here. So we applied for the Michigan Equity Grant Program, got a $100,000 grant to build this beautiful replica of the Rowan Saloon, and sort of the rest is history.
Once you step inside the museum, Dave makes history come alive with his stories. Stories like the glory days of dune rides atop Sleeping Bear Dunes. For 43 years, families from all over the Midwest came to ride the dunes that overlook Lake Michigan.
Marion Warnes, youngest daughter of D.H. Day, married Louis Warnes, and Louis started by renting horses over the dunes. Then in 1935, they got into dune cars, which ran till 1978, taking millions of visitors over the Sleeping Bear Dunes. This all terminated when the National Park purchased their rights to ride the dune cars and ended that in 1978 after 4 fleets of different dune cars. The last being 65 Ford stretch pickup trucks.
While dune rides were an important part of Empire's recent history, ships of all sizes played an important part in the early 1900s, and fishing helped put money in the pocket and food on the table.
And then on Big Glen Lake, Gene Fisher had built a beautiful ship in Traverse City, put it on a wagon, took it to Traverse Bay, to Glen Arbor and Big Glen, where he fished commercial lake trout in Glen Lake using this wonderful hand-reeled wooden reel we have here. So it was crude fishing, but very effective. When you got a lake trout on, you just cranked up the wooden reel using some of these beautiful baits, mostly in Big Glen Lake for lake trout. Here we have a 1940 vintage fish shanty used primarily on Big Glen Lake for spearing lake trout. In this case, we used it in Little Glen Lake to fish for and catch perch in 12 feet of water in Little Glen, enjoying what it looks like for kids that have not seen it before, the bottom of a lake with perch swimming around, even though they weren't biting much this day, to give you an idea of what it's like, all them little black boxes you see setting out on the frozen ponds. Very comfortable way of fishing. In spite of being on the ice, you had a heater, the comfort, you brought sandwiches, and you enjoyed nature at its best. In the 1950s and before, the only way you got to these shanties was by car or truck, and a few of them went through the ice, but in late 50s, they introduced the snowmobile. The significance of this 67 Snowjet, it was the first snowmobile sold in Empire by me in our Taghon's Corner in 1967, and we continued through the 80s, but that completely changed ice fishing and the easy way of getting around the lakes and other wonderful recreational opportunities. In 1966, Howard Tanner introduced the coho salmon to northern Michigan, and the influence on Empire that it was in Platte Bay where the salmon were first released. It was a tremendous instant impact called coho fever. Prior to this, with the lake trout being decimated, there was very poor fishing. So with the introduction of the salmon, it was an instant fall boom to the whole area. Thousands of fishermen, any way they could get into Lake Michigan, from kayaks to canoes to, as you see here, fellas casting out into the lake for salmon and fellas trolling in to try and catch them. So it was a wonderful new fishery that started. And then with the total success of that, in 1967, there was a tragedy of a big storm came up. The coho fever was at high pitch. People didn't pay attention to the Coast Guard. Major storm, as you can see, some of the newspapers indicated 34 people unaccounted for. In the end, 2 drowned right off the Empire Beach as we were trying to rescue the hundreds of people coming in. And in the end, 7 people overall drowned. So the wonderful fever, the coho atmosphere, was stymied for 1 year, but next year it was bigger and better as they introduced coho into the entire Lake Michigan and other areas. Major impact on the village of Empire and its fishing history.
Another important part of Empire's history is its roots as a mill town. This model depicts to exact scale the industry that helped rebuild Chicago after the Great Fire. On the lower level, other bits of history survive: a bank, a blacksmith, a dentist chair, and signs of things once very popular, now just a memory. You'll find all these stories and much more at the Empire Museum in Michigan's Out of Doors.